Your 18-year coding legacy is basically boomer spaghetti code holding us back. Bradley Lawson said that to my face on a video call with a green smoothie sweating in his hand. Then he fired me like I was something he had scraped off his shoe. He smiled the whole time. Weeks later, that same smile was gone. His company was bleeding government contracts, federal regulators were circling, and the same executives who had laughed at the kid they brought in to replace me were calling my phone, asking me to come back. If a story like this is the kind that keeps you listening, take a second to subscribe. And drop your city and your local time in the comments, because I would love to know who is out there. And because what happened next is the best argument I know for never underestimating the quiet person who actually built the thing everyone depends on. But before I tell you how Meridian Aerospace ended up begging for the man they had just thrown away, you need to understand exactly what Bradley Lawson walked into. And the one thing he never bothered to read. The call came on a Friday at 3:47 in the afternoon. If you have ever worked inside a big company, you already know that timing is not an accident. That is the exact slot executives choose when they want bad news to slide quietly into the weekend, when HR is half out the door and nobody is around to ask the hard questions. Bradley sat there on camera with his expensive haircut and that smoothie, wearing the calm, rehearsed expression of a man who thinks he is being brave. He talked for 3 full minutes before he got anywhere near the point. Organizational efficiency, resource optimization, future-ready innovation. The words rolled out of him like he had practiced them in a mirror, and maybe he had. Then, finally, he said it. My position was being eliminated, effective immediately. No HR representative on the call, no transition plan, no written notice, nobody even said the word severance. Just a video window, a small fake apology, and the casual deletion of 18 years of my life. Here is what Bradley did not know about the man he was deleting. He was not cutting loose some tired engineer with gray in his beard and too many years in the same chair. He was firing a man with $3,247 left in his checking account. A man paying $3,200 a month in a divorce settlement. A man with a daughter halfway through her degree at Syracuse and a tuition bill of $45,000 sitting on the kitchen table. A man whose health insurance was about to jump to $1,800 a month the second that call ended. On paper, I looked cornered, trapped. Exactly the kind of man who swallows the insult, packs a cardboard box, and disappears. But desperation does a strange thing to a person. It sharpens the memory. And sitting there, watching Bradley's mouth move, I remembered the one thing he had never bothered to read. My original employment contract. The one I signed back in 2006. I joined Meridian Aerospace when the company still felt small enough that everyone knew each other by name. Over the next 18 years, I helped build the satellite communication systems, the encrypted protocols, and the authentication frameworks that kept their defense contracts alive. My code was not decoration. It carried government data. It protected classified networks. It held up systems where one careless shortcut could turn into a national security disaster. And here is the part Bradley missed completely. I did not just understand Meridian systems. Under one very specific clause buried in that 2006 contract, I legally owned the intellectual property behind them if the company ever terminated me without 120 days of written notice. Section 7.3. One quiet paragraph that had been sitting there for 18 years, ignored by every executive who assumed old paperwork did not matter. The moment Bradley fired me with no warning at all, that clause woke up. Every line of code he thought belonged to Meridian had just reverted back to me. That clause existed because of a man named Jake, an old friend from the base legal office, who had watched too many engineers get used, discarded, and quietly erased from the systems they built. When I accepted Meridian's offer, Jake told me one thing over a cheap beer. Protect yourself before the company needs you more than it respects you. So he wrote Section 7.3 into my agreement. A little insurance policy, folded into the paperwork, waiting. Bill Morrison, Meridian's founder, signed that contract without blinking. He was a former Air Force colonel, the kind of man who understood that a good engineer was not a replaceable part on a spreadsheet. Back then, Meridian was still fighting for its first serious defense contracts, and Bill cared a lot more about security clearances and client trust and keeping the lights on than about combing through every legal sentence. So the clause slipped in. No drama, no warning bells. Just one paragraph on one page, waiting 18 years for the wrong executive to make the wrong mistake. Bradley Lawson became that executive about 6 weeks before he fired me. The board brought him in to modernize operations ahead of a $1.8 billion acquisition. He arrived with a Wharton MBA venture capital confidence and the kind of polished corporate smile that makes a simple problem sound like material for a TED Talk. To Bradley, Meridian did not need patience or experience. It needed disruption. Speed. Someone young enough to mistake recklessness for vision. The problem was that Bradley did not understand engineering. He understood slides. He had the vocabulary of a visionary and the experience of a man who had never once watched production code fail at 2 in the morning while a government client waited on the phone. He talked about agile transformation and cloud-native infrastructure and velocity like those words could replace judgment. He had never written a single line of code for a defense contractor. He had never carried the weight of knowing that one bug could cut a destroyer off from headquarters or crack open a classified network for the wrong people. To Bradley, complexity looked like laziness. To me, it had always looked like survival. He looked at my systems and saw old code slowing him down. Red circles on architecture diagrams, outdated dependencies. A senior engineer who did not clap loud enough during his transformation pitch. What he did not see were the classified networks those systems protected, the contracts they kept alive, or the years of failures and fixes and hard lessons buried inside every line he wanted to throw away. His first changes sounded harmless if you did not understand what they touched. He renamed our project dashboard the Innovation Hub. He cut code review time in half. He pushed a $5,000 a month AI assistant that suggested shortcuts dressed up as optimization. To Bradley, every extra approval step was wasted time. To the rest of us, those steps were the only reason our systems had never collapsed under a federal audit. You do not treat defense software like a social media app. You do not move fast and break things when the thing you might break is a secure communication line tied to national security. Then Bradley started meeting privately with my junior engineers. He called them growth conversations. I knew what they really were. He was pulling information out of them about systems he did not understand, while quietly teaching them to question everything I had ever shown them. They came back from those meetings nervous, repeating his words about velocity and benchmarks and outdated processes. Smart kids, good engineers, suddenly wondering if careful work was the same thing as falling behind. After that, I started disappearing from my own company. Architecture meetings happened without me. Security briefings I had attended for 16 years suddenly did not require my input. Product managers stopped asking me direct questions and started sending careful little messages, like being seen with me might damage their careers. Then Bradley created a private channel called Next Gen Systems and forgot to add the man who had built the systems they were discussing. I only found out because someone quietly forwarded me the screenshots. And there they were, my diagrams, my architecture, My decisions, circled in red, labeled as legacy debt that needed to be removed. I did not confront him. I did not argue in meetings or fire off angry emails. I did something quieter. I documented everything, every message, every meeting I was cut out of. Every screenshot of my own work being repackaged as Bradley's innovation plan. I saved email threads, system edits, timestamps, digital signatures. While he was building his little transformation story for the board, I was building something else, something harder to wave away, a record of exactly what he was doing. The breaking point came during a client presentation with Pentagon procurement officers on the call. Bradley was up there, proud as anything, showing off what he called his streamlined authentication framework. New colors, new labels, enough buzzwords to make it sound original, but I recognized every layer of it because I had written every layer of it. The API structure was mine, the security protocols were mine. Even the failsafe logic came from a system I had spent 3 years rebuilding after a breach nearly cost Meridian a Navy contract. He stood there selling my work like a weekend project. And the man who actually built it was not even invited to the room. Then one of the Pentagon officers asked a simple technical question about the failsafe procedure. Bradley froze. For a solid 30 seconds, he clicked through slides, cleared his throat, and gave the kind of empty answer people give when they are hoping confidence can cover for ignorance. Finally, he said he would circle back with the technical team. The technical team was me, and I was not in the room. That was the moment I understood what was really happening. Bradley was not trying to modernize my work. He was preparing to erase me from it. You do not cut the system architect out of a client meeting about his own architecture unless you are planning to make him vanish right afterward. I sat at my desk that evening, my coffee cold beside the keyboard, staring at those forwarded screenshots, and felt something settle in my chest that was colder than anger. Bradley thought I was old, slow, replaceable. He thought my silence meant weakness. But silence had always been how I worked best. While he performed innovation for the room, I started getting ready for the day he would finally make his mistake. I pulled everything before he could lock me out. The full commit history, more than 4,000 commits with my name on them. Architecture documents dated years before Bradley ever walked through the door. Email threads where I had warned, in writing, against the exact shortcuts he was now selling as genius. Then I printed my employment contract, highlighted section 7.3 in yellow, scanned it, and sent it to Jim Murphy, my lawyer, with one question. Still enforceable? Jim replied in 8 minutes. Not 8 hours, not the next morning, 8 minutes. His message was 5 words long. Absolutely. They are legally screwed. I read it twice. Then I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath for the first time all week. Bradley thought he had removed a problem. What he had actually done was reach down and flip on the one clause Meridian's executives had forgotten existed. 18 years of code, architecture, protocols, and documentation were no longer tucked safely under the company's name. Legally, the foundation Bradley planned to modernize had just shifted ownerships back to the man he was about to fire. So when the real termination call came at 3:47 that Friday, I was not shocked. I had already seen the shape of it coming. Bradley appeared on my screen with that practiced executive calm, talking like he was making a brave business decision instead of stepping straight into a clause he had never read. And then he made the mistake that sealed all of it. He leaned back, gave me that hollow little laugh, and said, "Don't stress, Tom. Your fingerprints are all over our success story. All your work belongs to the company now, right?" I did not answer. I just looked at the screen and let him have his moment. No HR rep joined the call. No severance. Nobody mentioned a transition plan. 20 minutes later, he sent me a message full of fake warmth and good vibes and best of luck out there. He honestly believed he had just taken my life's work. He had no idea he had handed it back to me. I did not yell. I did not threaten him. I logged off, closed the laptop, and poured 2 fingers of bourbon with hands a lot steadier than I expected. Then I opened the laptop again and wrote 1 email to Jim Murphy. The subject line was simple. Terminated without notice. Section 7.3 is live. I attached the contract, the commit history, the message archives. Bradley fired me at 3:47. By 4:12, the trap was already moving. By Sunday morning, Jim had the first legal strike ready. It was not emotional. It was not dramatic. It was worse than that. It was precise. The cease and desist letter laid it all out, line by line.
Section 7.3. The termination without notice. The immediate reversion of the intellectual property to me. And then came the proof. Time-stamped commits. Old architecture documents. Message records.
Screenshots of Bradley repackaging my work. Emails where I had warned, in plain language, against the exact changes he had pushed through anyway. Jim did not have to raise his voice on paper. Every attachment did the talking. By the time Meridian's legal team opened that file, they would understand this was not a bluff. Then, Jim added the number that would make the company stop pretending this was minor. The first invoice came to $1,847,293.41. Calculated from unauthorized use, licensing value, security exposure, and the cost of forcing a defense contractor to learn contract law the hard way. It was not a random threat. Every dollar had a reason behind it. Bradley wanted innovation. What he got instead was an itemized bill for arrogance. At first, Meridian treated the letter like noise. Bradley told his people it was just a minor distraction from a man who could not adapt to change. He said legal had it handled, then posted another cheerful message about pushing the transformation full speed ahead. That was Bradley's gift and his curse all at once. He could turn any warning sign into a motivational slogan. He did not understand that the letter was not anger. It was ownership. Every system he planned to launch, every protocol he planned to rename, every feature he had already shown to investors was now sitting on legal ground he no longer controlled. The crash started on a Wednesday. Bradley's streamlined authentication system went live, and within 6 hours, Meridian's primary government portal began throwing security errors. Clients could not reach classified data streams. Sessions timed out. Secure servers rejected valid credentials. Customer support turned into a war room. Bradley called it a minor connectivity issue, but every engineer in that building knew the truth. His innovation had just broken the backbone of the whole operation. I should have felt triumphant. I did not. I mostly felt tired, because this was exactly the kind of failure I had spent years building safeguards to prevent. I had not built those protections to win an argument someday. I built them because when defense systems fail, the damage does not politely stay inside a conference room. By Thursday, it had spread far beyond the internal dashboards. Enterprise clients were locked out of classified data streams. Authentication failures stacked up by the minute. Secure sessions collapsed before users could finish a basic access check. Support tickets came in faster than anyone could read them. Government teams that depended on Meridian's portal were staring at error messages instead of mission-critical information. And every time someone tried to force their way past the problem, they tripped the automated security locks I had built years earlier. Those locks were doing exactly what they were designed to do. Stopping careless access before a broken system could turn into a national security breach. By Friday morning, the government noticed. The Defense Contract Management Agency issued a compliance warning and suspended classified data access until Meridian could explain the technical irregularities. Translated out of bureaucratic language, That meant they had broken something serious, and now the people who controlled their contracts wanted answers. The timing could not have been worse. Meridian was days away from a board review tied to its $1.8 billion acquisition, and suddenly Bradley's minor issue looked radioactive. The investors panicked first. They were not engineers, but they understood one thing perfectly. An unresolved intellectual property claim, plus suspended government access, could kill a $1.8 billion deal overnight. Legal started demanding urgent clarification. Board members wanted to know who actually owned the core systems Bradley had been parading in front of buyers. Every feature he had called Next Generation suddenly had a question mark hanging off it. Because if my claim held up, Meridian was not just facing downtime. They were trying to sell a company whose most important technology might legally belong to the man they had fired on a video call. Bradley's confidence evaporated almost overnight. The man who used to flood every channel with rocket emojis and transformation slogans suddenly kept his camera off during calls. The voice that once filled every meeting turned thin and careful. Then the emergency board meeting got scheduled, and for the first time since he arrived, Bradley was not invited to lead the conversation. The spotlight he loved so much had quietly become a courtroom without a judge. And then came the quietest kind of corporate punishment, the kind that happens with no music, no speeches, and nobody ever saying the word fired. By noon, Bradley's biography vanished from the company website. No farewell email, no proud announcement about pursuing new opportunities. Just a blank space where his title used to be. 3 hours later, the company released a careful statement about a leadership transition and a strategic realignment focused on regulatory compliance. I read it twice and almost laughed. Corporate language has a special talent for hiding blood on the carpet. What it actually meant was simple. Bradley had driven Meridian into a legal and technical minefield, and the board cut him loose before the whole acquisition went up with him. That evening, the investor who actually mattered called me directly. His voice did not have Bradley's polish or any of the corporate theater. It had weight. "Tom, first thing, we owe you an apology," he said. "We trusted the wrong people, and we badly undervalued what you built." Then he said the words I knew they hated needing to say. They wanted me back. Not as another engineer in the pool, as chief systems architect. I let the silence stretch long enough that he understood this was not going to be a normal rehiring conversation. Then I gave him my only condition. "If I come back," I said, "I keep the intellectual property, full legal ownership. Meridian licenses it from me, month to month, revocable on my terms. No blanket transfer, no hidden clause, no executive touches my systems without my approval." He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's unprecedented." I almost smiled. So is firing the man who built your foundation over a video call. After that, the negotiation got very simple. For the first time since Bradley had walked into the building, the power in the room no longer belonged to the people with the titles. Meridian could not sell a $1.8 billion acquisition package with its core technology sitting under a legal cloud. They could not keep their government clients calm without the systems I owned. So the board accepted every term. Full ownership stayed with me. The company would license the systems month to month, and any executive who wanted to modernize them would have to come through me first. When I returned, I did not come back as the man Bradley had fired. I came back as a contractor with veto power. No manager above me, no forced alignment meetings. No executive touching a core system just because a slide deck made it sound exciting. Every line of the new contract was written on my terms, reviewed by Jim, and signed by 3 executives who had finally learned the value of reading their paperwork. If Meridian wanted to use my code, they licensed it. If they wanted to change it, they asked. I was not sitting at their table anymore. In a very real sense, I owned the table. But before I fixed a single line of code, the company had to pay the bill. Jim updated the final invoice to $2,194,567.83. It covered unauthorized use, security exposure, investor damage, and what he politely called consultant education fees. They did not negotiate. The wire transfer landed on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in my kitchen drinking coffee. The money was nice, but the message underneath it mattered more. Respect gets expensive when it shows up late. The first thing I did once I was back was walk through the wreckage Bradley had left behind. It was worse than I expected. His team had ripped out fail-safe protocols I had written after the breach in 2019. They had stripped out authentication loops they decided were redundant. They had swapped proven safeguards for shortcuts that looked clean on a slide and dangerous in production. Every single decision had the same fingerprint: faster, thinner, riskier. The junior developers looked ashamed when I walked them through it, but I did not blame them. They had been told to move fast and break things. Nobody had ever explained that in our world, the thing you break might be the wall protecting classified communications. That was when the younger engineers finally understood what Bradley had hidden from them all along. They were not working on a normal software product. They were touching systems tied to classified communications, federal audits, and national security. One of them asked, half embarrassed, "Why didn't anyone tell us it mattered this much?" I looked at the broken deployment logs for a second and said, "Because Bradley never read the documentation, and nobody wanted to look stupid by asking." After that, I changed the way I taught them. No more assuming young engineers would magically absorb 18 years of context by reading dry documentation. Every week, I sat them down and walked through the real history. The failed deployments, the audit scares, the reason behind every annoying security rule they had been told to ignore. I showed them why 3 levels of review existed, why backup authentication mattered, why boring code is so often the code that saves the day. This is not about slowing you down, I told them. It is about making sure your work still holds when lives and contracts and classified systems are leaning on it. For the first time, they listened without rolling their eyes. 3 months after I came back, Meridian landed a new $400 million contract with the Space Force. The procurement officer praised our security protocols, our reliability, and our experienced technical leadership. I did not say it out loud, but everyone in that conference room understood the arithmetic. Bradley's modernization had nearly cost the company $800 million in existing contracts. My so-called outdated systems had just helped win $400 million more. Bradley disappeared from the industry about as quietly as he had disappeared from the company website. No triumphant post about new adventures. No consulting firm bragging about his transformation expertise. One week, he was the man promising to disrupt legacy aerospace. The next, his name was something people avoided saying too loudly in meetings. I heard later that he tried blaming legal, then the engineers, then me, for not documenting things clearly enough. But the board had stopped caring about excuses. They had seen the damage with their own eyes. Bradley Lawson was not a visionary anymore. He was a cautionary tale with a business school vocabulary. 6 months after my return, the $1.8 billion acquisition finally went through. The new parent company did not treat my consulting fees like a problem. They wrote them straight into the purchase agreement as a cost of doing business. During the transition, their chief technology officer asked me, casually, how long it would take to replace my systems with something more modern. I smiled and said, about 18 years if you do it right. After the acquisition, my role turned into something I never expected. I was not just a consultant patching old systems anymore. I had become, in a strange way, the company's technical conscience. Major decisions crossed my desk not because the contract forced them to ask, but because they had learned exactly what happened when they did not. Executives who used to chase speed now ask me about risk. Managers who used to complain about documentation now requested written impact reports before they touched anything. Even the parent company treated my approval as part of the infrastructure. My code kept the systems running, but my judgment kept people from breaking them again. Eventually, people outside the company started asking me to come speak about what had happened, not the gossip, the lesson underneath it. I gave talks with titles like Why Boring Code Saves Lives and The True Price of Technical Shortcuts. In rooms full of chief technology officers and engineering directors, I told them the same thing. Moving fast is easy. Knowing what not to break is the part that separates real builders from corporate performers. The strange part was watching the exact same mistake play out somewhere else. A former colleague called me from a startup building satellite communication software, worried because their new chief technology officer wanted to tear everything down and rebuild it with microservices and continuous deployment and cloud-native slogans. I asked one question. Does he understand those systems talk to spacecraft? The answer was no. I told them to stop him before he burned the company to the ground. They did not. 4 months later, their shiny modern system failed. During a critical mission, their biggest client walked away, and the startup folded. Bradley was not unique. He was just one version of a very expensive pattern. But the part of all this that stayed with me the longest was not the money, or the title, or watching Bradley vanish. It was a conversation I had with my daughter, months later. She graduated from Syracuse with a computer science degree last spring. One night, sitting on the back steps, she asked if I ever regretted not chasing startup money or building something flashier. I told her the truth. Old systems are not always obsolete. Sometimes they are old because they work. There is a difference between legacy code and proven code. One gets thrown away because people are bored. The other survives because people depend on it. Then, last month, Bradley emailed me. The subject line was almost funny, catching up and exploring opportunities. Apparently, he had resurfaced as a consultant for early-stage companies, helping them with their technical scaling challenges. His pitch was exactly what you would expect from a man who had learned nothing. AI-driven optimization for legacy defense systems. I stared at that email for a long time. Part of me wanted to write back and explain, line by line, why that exact thinking had already destroyed his career once. Part of me wanted to forward it to Jim just for the laugh. Instead, I deleted it. Some people do not learn. They just rebrand the same mistake and sell it again. The real lesson was simple. Not everything old is broken. Some things survive because they were built carefully, tested painfully, and trusted when failure was not an option. Bradley looked at 18 years of experience and saw a problem to remove. I looked at the same 18 years and saw proof. Innovation matters, but so does knowing what deserves protecting. Sometimes the smartest thing a person can do is stop just before they improve something they do not understand. The revenge, if you even want to call it that, was never really about the money. It was not about watching Bradley lose his title, or about executives suddenly remembering my name. The real revenge was being right after being dismissed. It was 18 years of documentation and safeguards and late-night fixes proving their worth the very moment arrogance tried to replace them. I did not sabotage anything. I did not burn anything down. I simply stepped back and let the truth stand in the open. Bradley thought he had fired an outdated engineer. What he actually did was remove the one person who understood why the whole thing still worked. Sometimes the best innovation is knowing what not to change. And sometimes the strongest revenge is not yelling, not begging, and not burning a single bridge. It is being so good at your work that people only understand your value after you are gone. If this story kept you listening all the way to the end, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, if you were Tom, would you have gone back to the company that fired you? Or would you have walked away forever?